Now, as reported by Gerald Pickard in this week's Farmers Weekly, New Zealand Pork is assessing its options after a High Court judge ruled that the animal welfare standards governing the use of farrowing crates and mating stools are unlawful and invalid. The judgment released by High Court Justice Helen Cull directed the Minister of Agriculture to consider recommending new regulations phasing out the use of farrowing crates and mating stools and consider making such changes as necessary to minimum standards. The case was brought to court by the New Zealand Animal Law Association, the one famously providing lawyers for animals, and animal welfare group SAFE. Now, this is following advice previously, a couple of years ago, to Minister O'Connor that the current standards of animal welfare in New Zealand were fine. We're joined now by Dr. Kirsty Chidgey, who is an animal welfare scientist for New Zealand Pork. Welcome to Sarah's Country. I know there's a lot of interested people to hear what you have to say tonight. Kirsty, could you just paint a picture for us around the advice that was originally given to the Minister?
Yeah, so in 2014 to 2016, NAWAC carried out a review of the use of farrow rates. And before that, they'd previously said that farrowing crates don't fully meet the obligations or all of the obligations of the Animal Welfare Act, but they were, effectively enabled through an exception in the Act that used to be available to allow certain practices to continue. In 2016, they sort of changed some of their advice a little bit by saying that farrowing crates were the minimum necessary to enable the obligations of the Act to be met. And then in 2018, they sort of flip-flopped a little bit again with their submission to the Select Committee on the petition to ban farrowing crates and mating stools, again saying that they don't fully meet the obligations of the Act. So one of the key points of the court case was that inconsistency of advice that was provided around the use of farrowing crates, particularly in New Zealand.
Can you paint the picture for those who are not familiar with what a farrowing crate or a mating stool is and how it compares to practice globally?
Sure. So farrowing crates are the most common system that's used and to nurse their piglets in the global pork industry. In New Zealand, we've got less than 100 farmers, and half of those are indoor based and would be using, for the most part, farrowing crates, and some would be using mating stools, not quite as many. Farrowing crates are used to provide piglet protection mostly, and that's what they do achieve. We see much lower rates of piglet death in farrowing crates, and that's because they mostly reduce piglet crushing, which is one of the highest causes of piglet death before weaning. So that is the main reason why these systems are used. There's other reasons around things like stock person safety as well, and general management and husbandry. But primarily, they provide piglet protection. Mating stools are used for the purpose of mating only, and they are used for a maximum of 7 days, which is required for regulation, and farmers must provide documentation around that too. So again, it comes down to welfare, and it comes down to management as well, and making sure going forward that we do the welfare of the piglets as well as the welfare of the sows.
So what is New Zealand Pork doing to ensure that animal welfare is, in your opinion, upheld to a high standard?
So the pork is the Care on Farm Welfare Assurance Program, and around, it would be over 95% of commercial farmers are certified under pig care. So currently that assures compliance with the minimum standards and the regulations in the code, and it addresses other sort of non-code factors that are all indirectly or directly involved in animal welfare. So it means that every year, almost every commercial pig farm in New Zealand is audited to those standards. And that's that's one strength of that system.
And so, Kirsty, what does it look like under this new High Court ruling for the future for New Zealand pig farmers in regards to their production system? Is it not just as easy as allowing pigs to burrow and nest outside and being able to do as nature prevails it?
Well, that's the big question. What might farmers be required to transition to? How long might they have to do that? As an animal welfare advisor, it's really difficult for me because there are so many systems available and none of them are perfect. They all do their best to meet the needs of the sow and the piglet, but the real challenge is balancing those needs. And there is no alternative system that indoor farmers could use that would achieve the same outcomes for piglet welfare and piglet survival that farrowing crates currently achieve. Of course, the sow's welfare is important to be considered as well, but it's not as simple as identifying a particular system that farmers could move to, because that's really unclear at the moment.
Is there any other country in the world that will be similar to these type of rulings?
There are around 5 countries that have effectively phased out farrowing crates for all of lactation, but every single one of them allows them to be used in the first stages after a sow's birth. And that's in recognition that that's a really critical period where most piglet mortality happens. So none of them have agreed to completely ban farrowing crates. They've all enabled farmers to use them under certain conditions in the acknowledgement that they do prevent pig deaths.
I have a very tear-jerking comment come in here that I do need to read out at the end to appreciate what is happening and to the industry at the moment. Kirsty, I do want to ask you, what type of cost will this add to the production of New Zealand pork, and ultimately what could happen with our imported pork figures so high already?
Yeah, obviously farmers will be in the position of deciding whether they can invest in a new system or whether they choose instead to exit the industry, which is a really difficult position for them to be in. Any shortfall in pork will very likely be made up from more imports with questionable welfare practices, and that is really concerning, and I don't think the average consumer would like to see that as an outcome. So that's one of the potential outcomes that our farmers are facing currently is that they may choose to exit the industry as a result.
So what's the strategy going forward for New Zealand pork? Can you appeal?
We can't directly appeal because we're not a party to the court proceedings ourselves. What's happening in the meantime is that the Code of Welfare is being reviewed. So we'll be involved in the review of the code and the drafting process of the new code, and that's being initiated now. So that's our immediate plan. It's also to understand whether the regulations will be addressed through that code review process or whether they have to be dealt with before that happens in a shorter time frame.
We're going to be following this story with great interest. Thank you so much, Dr. Kirsty Chidgey there, who is an animal welfare scientist at New Zealand Pork, following a High Court ruling that the way the farrowing crates and mating stalls on New Zealand farms here are unlawful and invalid.
This is Sarah's Country.